One photograph changed how the world saw the Vietnam War. On June 8, 1972, Associated Press photographer Nick Ut captured a naked, burned 9-year-old girl, Kim Phuc, running down a road after a napalm strike. The image ran across front pages, stunned millions, and became a blunt measure of war's human cost. The street that day was chaos. South Vietnamese aircraft had dropped napalm on the village of Trang Bang. Civilians were burning and fleeing, and UT's camera arrived at the exact second that pain became a public image. He then carried Kim to a hospital, actions that mattered as much as the photo itself. Pictures travel faster than explanations. As that frame circled the globe, editors, politicians, and ordinary citizens had to reckon with a concrete face of suffering. The photo won a Pulitzer, sharpened anti-war sentiment, and forced journalists to ask whether showing raw pain was necessary for truth. The girl in that photograph grew up. Kim Phuc survived years of surgery, later resettled abroad and became a voice for healing. And the story behind the shot shows how one split-second decision by a photographer altered lives, press practice, and public debate. So stay with this video to see the real person behind the icon, the choices made in the moment, and why a single image still matters today. 1. On June 8, 1972, an airstrike in South Vietnam left 9-year-old Phan Thai Kim Phuc with severe burns. Her annotations: sad smiley, refusal, null, roll colon assistant. 2. Associated Press photographer Nick Ut captured the iconic image of her running down the road with other children. A photographer's split-second decision can turn a private horror into a public record. Nick Ut, working for the Associated Press, lifted his camera and kept shooting as she and a group of children ran along the road, away from burning trees and smoke. He was close enough that the motion, the rawness, and the expressions read clearly in a single frame. That closeness made all the difference. He didn't wait for a tidy moment. He fired in rapid succession and found the exact instant that condensed panic into an image people could immediately understand. In the photograph, you can see several children on the road with her, each moving in different ways, stumbling, turning, running, and that variety gives the picture depth and urgency. Because he captured movement rather than a posed scene, the image feels like it happened right in front of you. He chose a perspective that put the fleeing children at eye level with the viewer, which pulled people into the scene instead of keeping them at a distance. The road slicing through the frame and the cluster of children moving toward the camera creates a clear visual story: escape, pain, and motion. That compositional clarity is why editors around the world could pick that single negative and no readers would immediately grasp what was happening. After pressing the shutter, he didn't go back to his desk. He acted on what he had just recorded and helped get her medical attention, bundling the role of journalist with that of bystander. That decision, to shoot and then to help, is part of why the image became more than just a photograph. It became a catalyst for responses that followed the picture into newsrooms and hospitals. 3. The photograph spread worldwide and became a symbol of civilian suffering in the war. Across living rooms and newsroom floors, the same picture arrived at once, carried by the Associated Press wire and picked up by newspapers and TV newscasts around the world. It went from a camera and a darkroom into millions of eyes within hours. That fast, relentless circulation made the image unavoidable and set the stage for how people would think about the war. The photograph's physical reach, front pages, film clips, and magazine spreads, turned a local catastrophe into a global story. People everywhere found themselves looking at a child's burned body, and the reaction was immediate and visceral. Silence followed many viewings. Because the image showed civilian agony so directly, it broke through abstract statistics and military jargon. Readers who had skimmed casualty reports stopped and watched. Families who turned on evening news couldn't unsee the scene. Concrete reproductions on posters and in papers made distant suffering feel uncomfortably near. In protests and editorial rooms, the photograph became shorthand for a larger argument about the human cost of the conflict. Demonstrators carried enlarged prints on city streets, and opinion pages ran columns that referenced the image again and again. That steady repetition linked the photograph to demands for policy changes and to broader public debate about the war's morality. The more the picture circulated, the more it was used as evidence that civilians were paying the heaviest price. Even after the initial shock faded, the image kept showing up in history books, museum exhibitions, and journalism anthologies as a concise visual statement about wartime suffering. Its awards and wide publication cemented its status as an emblem. Because newspapers, broadcasters, and later curators kept returning to the photograph, it moved from news item to enduring symbol, a single frame that people across nations invoked when they wanted to talk about civilians caught in combat. 4. The story included immediate assistance at the scene and Kim Phuc's long recovery. When someone is burned badly, the first few minutes decide whether they live or die. Journalists, soldiers, and villagers who were nearby didn't stand back. They pulled off smoldering clothes, threw water, and tried to soothe the screams. An Associated Press photographer who'd just taken the picture stopped photographing long enough to scoop her up and get her out of the open road. That quick chain of hands and decisions got her to medical care instead of letting shock and infection finish the job. In the chaos, one clear action changed everything. The photographer drove her straight to a hospital in Saigon. He didn't leave her on the roadside or wait for an ambulance that might never come. Because he acted immediately, hospital staff were able to begin treating the worst of the burns and keep her breathing and hydrated. That single decision to put her in a vehicle and push through traffic saved time and saved her life. Hospitals treated the wounds the only way they could then and for years afterward, with debridement, dressings, and skin grafts. She went through more than a dozen reconstructive operations over the following years, each one aimed at removing scar tissue, restoring skin coverage, and improving mobility. Those surgeries were painful and slow, and every operation addressed a new problem caused by the original burns, like tight scarring that limited movement or repeated infections that had to be cleared surgically. Recovery was not just surgeries and dressings. It was decades of follow-up care, therapy, and learning to live with visible scars. Physical therapy stretched and strengthened tissues to regain function, while pain management and wound care became part of everyday life for a long time. The visible scars healed unevenly, and the psychological wounds required their own attention as she coped with memories and public attention. But steady medical care and repeated reconstructive procedures turned a near-fatal injury into a long process of gradual, hard-won healing. 5. The image entered photojournalism history as an example of how one photo can reshape public perception of conflict. Many graphic images appear in the news, but one photograph by Associated Press photographer Nick Ut of a severely burned child fleeing a napalm attack cut through the noise. It stopped people. Ut not only made the picture, he also drove the girl to a hospital and saved her life, and that immediacy shows in the frame. The subject, Phan Thai Kim Phuc, became the human face of a horror that previously lived mostly in abstract reports and casualty totals. The shock registered quickly. Wire services pushed the picture onto front pages around the world, and editors could not ignore it. Because the image was so raw and unmistakable, it undercut sanitized official accounts and forced readers to ask blunt questions about tactics and responsibility. People who had treated distant reports as background began to see suffering as close and urgent. Editors and colleagues recognized its power. Nick Ut received journalism's highest recognition for the photograph, and the image entered the curriculum and discussions in newsrooms and journalism schools. That recognition changed practice. Editors weighed visual proof more heavily and were more willing to publish disturbing images when they exposed civilian harm. At the same time, the photo sparked ongoing ethical debates about the line between necessary witness and voyeurism. The long view shows how a single frame can reshape public perception. By putting a naked, injured child at the center of a global news cycle, the photograph turned abstract policy discussions into moral questions people could see and feel, and that shift amplified anti-war sentiment and reshaped public debate. Her image became an emblem used by activists, educators, and humanitarian organizations to illustrate the human cost of armed conflict. The result was a clearer, more emotional public understanding of what a distant war actually meant for civilians. You probably remember the image that stopped people in their tracks. Taken after napalm strike in 1972, Nick Ut's photograph of 9-year-old Kim Phuc, burned, terrified, running naked down a road, was wired around the world, printed on front pages, won a Pulitzer, and became a stark symbol that made the Vietnam War's human cost impossible to ignore. When a photograph makes you flinch, it pulls the distant into the immediate and forces a new conversation. That visual shock fed public outrage, showed up in protests and editorials, and helped shift how many ordinary citizens and politicians thought about the conflict. The story didn't stop with the shutter click. Kim Phuc survived, endured decades of treatment and scars, and later devoted herself to helping others, creating a foundation to assist child victims of war and speaking about forgiveness and healing. So the image's meaning expanded from a moment of suffering to a decades-long life of recovery and advocacy. If this left you uneasy or curious, that's part of why we tell these stories. Pictures change memory and, sometimes, policy. You can find links to original reports and survivor interviews in the description. And if you want more, we'll be exploring next how wartime photojournalism is made and remembered. There's more coming, and we'll keep listening.